Victoria Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, 42 stories above the city, watching the last of her employees hurry toward the elevators, with wrapped presents tucked under their arms and genuine smiles on their faces. It was 6:30 on Christmas Eve, and the building was finally, blessedly empty. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and exhaled slowly, watching her breath fog the surface for just a moment before disappearing. Below her, the city sparkled with 1,000 Christmas lights strung across storefronts and wrapped around lampposts, and she could see families bundled in winter coats streaming toward restaurants and theaters, their laughter rising up even to her isolated perch. At 42 years old, Victoria had built an empire. Her tech company was worth $3.7 billion. She had been featured on the cover of Forbes twice. She employed over 800 people. And tonight, like every Christmas Eve for the past 7 years, she was completely, utterly alone. Her assistant, Margaret, had knocked softly on her door at 5:15, coat already on, scarf wrapped around her neck. "Ms. Chen, I'm heading out. Are you sure you don't want to join us? A few of us are grabbing drinks at that bar on 5th. Margaret's eyes had held that look, the one Victoria had come to recognize over the years, a mixture of pity and concern, like she was staring at something wounded that didn't know it was bleeding. Victoria had smiled her professional smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes, and said, "I have work to finish. You go ahead. Merry Christmas, Margaret." And Margaret had hesitated, just for a beat, before nodding and closing the door with a quiet click that echoed in the sudden silence. Victoria turned away from the window and looked at her desk. There was no work to finish. There never was, not really. She just couldn't bear the thought of going back to her penthouse, to all that empty space and expensive furniture and art she'd bought, because her decorator said it was important, not because it meant anything to her. She'd walk through that door, and the silence would swallow her whole, the way it did every night, but especially tonight. Christmas Eve was the worst. It was the night when the absence of what she'd lost felt most like a physical presence, a ghost that sat across from her at the dining table she never used, and whispered all the things she could have done differently. She grabbed her coat, a long black cashmere that probably cost more than most people spent on rent, and locked her office door behind her. The building was hollow as she walked through it, her heels clicking against marble floors, echoing in empty corridors lined with darkened offices where normal people with normal lives had left hours ago to be with people they loved. Victoria stepped out into the December cold, and the city hit her all at once. The smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor packing up for the night. The sound of carolers on the corner singing something about silent nights and holy nights. The rush of taxis and the distant peal of church bells, marking the hour. She started walking. She always walked on Christmas Eve. It was a ritual she'd developed, though she'd never admitted it to anyone, not even to her therapist during the 2 months she'd tried therapy before deciding it was pointless. She would walk for hours through the city, past restaurants with windows steamed from the warmth inside, where she could see families crowded around tables and couples leaning close over candlelight. She'd walk past toy stores where children pressed their faces against glass displays of trains and dolls and things that lit up and spun. She'd walk past apartment buildings where she could glimpse Christmas trees through windows, their lights blinking in reds and greens and golds, and she would feel absolutely nothing. Or she'd try to feel nothing. Mostly she just felt hollow. 7 years. It had been 7 years since the accident. 7 years since the drunk driver ran the red light at the intersection of Park and 33rd and turned her entire world into something unrecognizable. Her husband, Michael, had died on impact. Her daughter, Lily, had held on for 3 hours at the hospital, long enough for Victoria to hold her hand and whisper that Mommy loved her, that everything would be okay, lies that tasted like ash on her tongue. Lily was 5 years old. She'd been singing Jingle Bells in the back seat when the impact came. Victoria had been at work, finishing a presentation for a client meeting the next morning. She hadn't been there. She was never there. And then there was nothing left to be there for. The grief had nearly destroyed her. For 6 months, she couldn't get out of bed. She'd sold the house because she couldn't walk through rooms that still smelled like Lily's strawberry shampoo and Michael's cologne. She'd thrown herself into work with a kind of manic desperation, building her company into something massive and untouchable. Because if she stopped moving, if she stopped achieving, she would have to sit with the silence and the absence and the guilt that never quite left. She hadn't celebrated Christmas since. She'd removed every decoration from her life, every reminder. Her penthouse was all clean lines and neutral colors, and absolutely nothing that could remind her of what December 25th used to mean. Victoria turned down a side street, one she didn't usually walk, and the crowds thinned. The storefronts here were smaller, less polished. A closed diner with chairs stacked on tables, a laundromat with a flickering neon sign, a cafe with dark windows and a handwritten sign that said, "Closed for the holidays, Merry Christmas." And that's when she saw him. He was sitting on the sidewalk, his back against the cafe's brick wall, almost invisible in the shadows between streetlights. A man, maybe 35, wearing a jacket that was too thin for the weather and jeans that had seen better days. In his hands, he held a piece of cardboard, the edges soft and worn like he'd been holding it for hours. The words were written in careful black marker: "Single dad, lost my job. Anything helps. God bless." But it wasn't the sign that made Victoria stop walking. It was the little girl. She was maybe 6 years old, curled against the man's side, her head resting on his shoulder, asleep despite the cold. She wore a pink coat that was too small, the sleeves ending well above her wrists, and scuffed white sneakers with no socks. The man had his arm wrapped around her, his body curved protectively, like he was trying to shield her from the wind with nothing but his own warmth. His head was down, his eyes fixed on the sidewalk in front of him, and there was something about the set of his shoulders, the defeat and the dignity somehow existing in the same posture that made Victoria's chest tighten. She'd walked past 1,000 people on the streets of this city, 1,000 hands extended, 1,000 cardboard signs, 1,000 voices asking for change or food, or just acknowledgement that they existed. She had never stopped, not once. She told herself it was because you couldn't help everyone, that giving money to one person on one corner didn't solve anything systemic, that there were organizations and shelters and programs designed for this. She told herself a lot of things that let her keep walking with her eyes straight ahead, but something about this man, about the way he held that sleeping child like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, like his body would take every bit of cold and hunger and hardship if it meant she could sleep for just a few minutes. Something about that image cracked through every defense Victoria had built. She found herself walking toward him. The man didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her approach. She stood there for a moment, this woman in a coat that cost $3,000, staring down at this man who probably didn't have $3 to his name. And then she heard herself speak, her voice sounding strange and too loud in the quiet street. "When did you last eat?" The man's head jerked up, his eyes widening in surprise. They were brown, she noticed, dark and exhausted and wary. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to determine if she was real, or some kind of hallucination brought on by hunger and cold. Then he glanced down at his daughter, still sleeping, and something in his expression shifted pride warring with desperation. "We're okay," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it much recently. "Thank you, but we're okay." Victoria should have walked away. That would have been the rational thing, the safe thing. Instead, she crouched down, bringing herself to eye level with him, ignoring the way her expensive coat dragged on the dirty sidewalk. "I'm going to ask you again," she said, her voice gentler this time. "When did you last eat? A real meal, not vending machine food or something someone handed you." The man stared at her, and she watched him struggle with the question, with his pride, with the reality of his situation. His jaw tightened. "Yesterday morning," he admitted finally. "But Emma ate tonight. A woman gave us sandwiches from a deli. Emma had both of them. She needs it more than I do." Victoria looked at the sleeping child, at her too small coat and her pale face, and felt something shift inside her, something she'd kept locked away for 7 years. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here," she said. "Let me buy you both dinner. A real dinner. It's Christmas Eve. No one should be hungry on Christmas Eve." The man shook his head immediately, that pride flaring in his eyes again. "I'm not looking for handouts. We just need a little help to get back on our feet. I'm not a charity case." "I didn't say you were," Victoria replied. She didn't know why she was pushing this, why she couldn't just walk away like she had every other time. "I'm offering to buy 2 people dinner. You can say yes or no. But your daughter is 6 years old and sleeping on a sidewalk in 30-degree weather, and I'm guessing you're not going to find an open shelter tonight because they're all full. So you can accept help from a stranger who's offering it freely, or you can sit here and freeze out of pride. Your choice." Something in her words, maybe the bluntness of them, made the man's defenses crack just slightly. He looked down at Emma again, at her thin coat and her 2 small shoes, and Victoria saw the exact moment his resolve broke. It was there in the slump of his shoulders, the way his hand tightened protectively on his daughter's arm. Just dinner, he said quietly. And then we'll be on our way. I'm not looking for anything more than that. Just dinner, Victoria agreed, though some part of her already knew that was a lie. The man shifted carefully, trying not to wake his daughter, but the movement stirred her anyway. Emma's eyes fluttered open, confused and heavy with sleep. She looked up at her father, then at Victoria, and her eyes went wide. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small and wondering. "Is that an angel?" The man Victoria still didn't know his name, let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "No, sweetheart. She's just a nice lady who wants to help us." But Emma kept staring at Victoria with those huge eyes, and Victoria felt her throat close up because those eyes, that face, she looked so much like Lily. Not exactly, but enough. Enough to make Victoria's hands shake as she stood up and extended one toward the man. "My name is Victoria," she said. "What's yours?" The man took her hand, his grip weak from cold and hunger. "David," he said. "David Morrison. And this is Emma." "It's nice to meet you both," Victoria said, and meant it in a way that surprised her. "Now let's get you some food before that diner closes too." Victoria woke on Christmas morning to a sound she hadn't heard in her penthouse in 7 years. Laughter. Real, genuine, childlike laughter echoing from somewhere down the hallway. For a moment, still caught in that hazy space between sleep and waking, she thought she was dreaming. Or worse, that she was remembering, that her mind had decided to torture her with memories of Lily's voice on Christmas mornings past. But then she heard the clatter of pans and a man's voice, low and warm, saying something she couldn't quite make out, followed by more laughter. She sat up, the events of the previous night flooding back. The diner. David and Emma across from her in a cracked vinyl booth. Emma's eyes huge as she stared at the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. David had barely eaten, Victoria noticed, pushing most of his food toward Emma when he thought Victoria wasn't looking, telling his daughter she could have his fries, his toast, the extra bacon. Victoria had ordered more food, claiming she'd overordered, couldn't possibly eat it all, watching relief and shame fight for dominance in David's expression as he finally let himself eat. Over coffee that David wrapped his hands around like it was a lifeline, the full story had emerged in fragments. He'd been a graphic designer at a small firm, nothing glamorous but stable, enough to support him and Emma after his wife died. "Melanoma," he'd said quietly, staring into his mug. Sarah had been gone 2 years now. Emma barely remembered her, which broke his heart in a different way than losing her had. 3 months ago, his firm had gone under, couldn't compete with the bigger agencies. He'd burned through his savings looking for work, applying everywhere, but the market was tight and he didn't have the connections. 2 weeks ago, the eviction notice came. He'd been sleeping in his car with Emma, parking in different spots each night, using gym memberships for showers, trying desperately to keep some semblance of normalcy for his daughter. But the car had broken down yesterday, transmission gone, and the repair would cost more than the car was worth. So here they were, on the street, with nothing but a cardboard sign, and each other. Victoria had listened to all of this, her coffee going cold in her hands, and felt something crack open inside her chest. When David finished talking, his voice worn thin from the telling, she'd made a decision that defied every logical bone in her body. "I have a guest room," she'd said. "You can stay there tonight, just for tonight, just for Christmas." David had refused immediately, vigorously, his pride flaring up again. But Emma had been shivering despite the diner's warmth, and Victoria had seen the moment his defenses crumpled. "Just one night," he'd agreed finally. "And tomorrow I start looking for work. I'll find something. I'll get us back on our feet." The cab ride to her building had been quiet. Emma pressed against the window with wonder in her eyes, as the city lights blurred past. "Daddy, look how pretty," she'd whispered, and David had wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, his eyes suspiciously bright. When they'd walked into Victoria's penthouse with its marble floors and contemporary art and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city, Emma had stopped in the doorway and breathed. "Daddy, we're in a castle." Victoria had shown them to the guest room, had pulled out fresh towels and found some clothes that might fit David from the back of her closet, things Michael had left behind that she'd never been able to throw away. She'd told them to rest, to take showers, to make themselves comfortable. As she'd closed the door behind her, she'd heard Emma's small voice say, "Is this heaven, Daddy?" And David's broken whisper in response, "Close enough, sweetheart." Now, pulling on a robe, Victoria followed the sound of laughter to her kitchen and stopped in the doorway, completely unprepared for the scene in front of her. David stood at her stove, spatula in hand, flipping pancakes with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. He was wearing Michael's old sweatshirt, and it fit him well enough that Victoria had to look away for a moment, her throat tight. Emma sat at the kitchen island in one of Victoria's t-shirts that hung to her knees like a dress, her legs swinging as she drew something with crayons spread across the marble surface. David looked up and saw her, and his face flooded with something between embarrassment and determination. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to make breakfast, to say thank you. I found flour and eggs in your pantry, and Emma found these crayons in a drawer, and I know we're overstepping. We'll clean everything up and be out of your way." "David," Victoria interrupted gently, and he stopped mid-sentence. "It's fine, more than fine." She looked at the pancakes on the stove, at the coffee brewing in her machine that she'd forgotten she owned, at Emma humming softly as she colored. "I can't remember the last time anyone cooked in this kitchen." That was true. Victoria ate out or ordered in. Her kitchen was a showpiece, all gleaming appliances and expensive countertops that never got used. Seeing it come to life like this, seeing the mess of flour on the counter and the stack of slightly lopsided pancakes on a plate, made something in her chest ache in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. Emma looked up from her drawing, her face lighting up when she saw Victoria. "Look what the first made." She held up the paper, and Victoria stepped closer to see. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures standing under what appeared to be a Christmas tree. The figures were labeled in careful, childish handwriting: me, Daddy, and the angel lady. Victoria's vision blurred suddenly, and she had to blink several times before she could speak. "It's beautiful," she managed, her voice rough. "Can I keep it?" Emma's smile could have lit the entire city. "Yes, I made it for you because you're our angel, and angels should have pictures." She said this with such absolute certainty that Victoria had to turn away, pretending to examine the pancakes so no one would see the tears gathering in her eyes. They ate breakfast together at the dining table Victoria never used, the one that had sat empty and perfect for 7 years. Emma chattered constantly between bites, telling Victoria about her favorite color, purple, and her best friend at school, Mia, who moved away, and how her daddy was the best drawer in the whole world. David tried several times to quiet her, embarrassed, but Victoria shook her head. "Let her talk," she said softly. "I like listening." And she did. She liked the way Emma's voice filled the empty spaces of her apartment, the way her laughter echoed off the high ceilings. She liked watching David cut Emma's pancakes into careful pieces and wipe syrup from her chin with a tenderness that made Victoria's heart ache. She liked feeling, for the first time in 7 years, like her home was actually lived in. After breakfast, while Emma played with a tablet Victoria had pulled from a drawer, another forgotten thing from another life, David helped Victoria clean up. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then David said quietly, "Thank you for last night. For this. I know you didn't have to do any of it." Victoria rinsed a plate and set it in the dishwasher. "My daughter's name was Lily," she said, the words coming out before she'd consciously decided to say them. "She died 7 years ago. Car accident. She was 5. She felt David go still beside her. "My husband died too. Same accident. I wasn't there. I was at work, finishing a presentation that seemed so important at the time. And then I got the call, and nothing was important anymore. Nothing has been important since." She turned to look at David and found him staring at her with understanding that went bone deep. "I'm so sorry," he said, and it didn't sound like the empty platitude people usually offered. It sounded like he meant it, like he understood what it was to lose everything. Victoria nodded, looking down at her hands. "I haven't celebrated Christmas since it happened. I took down all the decorations, sold everything that reminded me of them. I built my company into something massive, because if I stopped working, I'd have to feel what I lost. And last night, when I saw you and Emma on that street, when I saw the way you held her," her voice cracked, "I couldn't walk past. I've walked past 1,000 people, but I couldn't walk past you. Because you reminded me of what it means to protect someone you love, even when everything falls apart around you." David set down the dish he was holding and turned to face her fully. "You gave us more than a meal and a warm bed," he said. "You gave us hope. Emma hasn't smiled like this in months. And he paused, his jaw working. "I was starting to think I'd failed her completely, that I couldn't keep her safe or fed or warm, that I was the worst father in the world. But you saw us, and you didn't look at us like we were trash or broken or invisible. You looked at us like we mattered." "You do matter," Victoria said fiercely. "Both of you." She took a breath, the idea forming even as she spoke. David, can I see your work? Your design portfolio? He blinked, caught off guard by the shift. Ah, yes, I have it on my phone. Why? Just show me. David pulled out his battered phone with its cracked screen and pulled up his portfolio. Victoria scrolled through it slowly, her designer's eye cataloging what she saw. The work was good. No, more than good. It was brilliant. Clean, emotional, with a humanity to it that most commercial design lacked. There was a logo for a children's hospital that made her throat tight. An ad campaign for a literacy nonprofit that was simple and devastating in its effectiveness. This was the kind of work her company needed, the kind of authentic emotional resonance she'd been searching for. David, she said carefully, looking up from the phone. I run a tech company, Chen Digital. Maybe you've heard of it. She saw recognition flash in his eyes. We're in the middle of a complete rebrand. I've been through 15 agencies in the past 6 months and rejected all of them because they don't understand what I'm looking for. But this, she gestured to his portfolio. This is exactly what I need. Real emotion, real humanity, not just polish and focus groups. David stared at her. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a job, Victoria confirmed, not out of pity. I need to be very clear about that. I didn't build a $3.7 billion company by being nice or charitable. I built it by recognizing talent when I see it. And you're talented, David. Exceptionally so. She watched him process this, watched hope and disbelief war across his face. I don't have an address. I don't have references that aren't from a company that went under. I don't have professional clothes, or we can figure all of that out, Victoria interrupted. But even as she said it, she realized the problem. David couldn't start a job without stability, without a place for Emma to live, without the foundation that employment required, and telling him to find an apartment with no current income was impossible. The idea came to her fully formed, audacious and impulsive, and completely unlike her usual calculated decisions. I own a brownstone in Brooklyn, she said. I bought it 5 years ago as an investment property, thought I might renovate it and flip it, but I never got around to it. It's been sitting empty. 3 bedrooms, needs some work, but it's livable. I'll let you stay there. David's eyes went wide. I can't afford rent-free, Victoria said firmly. Until you're back on your feet, until you've saved enough for a deposit somewhere else. And then we can talk about affordable rent if you want to stay. Consider it part of your employment package. David stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. And then, suddenly, his face crumpled and he bent forward, hands bracing against the counter, shoulders shaking. Victoria realized with shock that he was crying, really crying. The kind of crying that came from months of held-back fear and exhaustion and desperation finally breaking through. She stood there awkwardly for a moment, unsure what to do, and then instinct took over and she put her hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, David choked out. I'm sorry, you don't understand what you're giving us. You're giving us our lives back. You're giving Emma a home and me a chance. And I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me, Victoria said quietly. Her own eyes were burning now. David, I need to tell you something. The past 7 years, I've been walking through my life like I'm already dead. I work and I exist and I breathe. But I haven't been living. And last night, when I saw you with Emma, when I watched you give her your food and hold her while she slept and protect her with everything you had, even though you had nothing, something woke up inside me, something I thought was gone forever. She paused, looking toward the living room where Emma was singing softly to herself, completely absorbed in whatever game she was playing on the tablet. You think I'm saving you, Victoria continued, her voice thick with emotion. But maybe you're saving me too. Maybe you're both saving me. David straightened, wiping at his eyes, and when he looked at her there was understanding there, recognition of shared pain and shared healing. Then we'll save each other, he said simply. If you're feeling this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. The sound of small feet running interrupted them. Emma appeared in the doorway, the tablet forgotten, her face worried. Why is Daddy crying? Did I do something bad? David immediately crouched down, pulling Emma into his arms. No, sweetheart. No, you didn't do anything bad. These are happy tears. The angel lady Victoria just gave us the best Christmas present in the whole world. Emma pulled back to look at her father's face, then at Victoria, her expression serious. What present? Victoria knelt down too, bringing herself to Emma's level. "A home," she said softly, "and a job for your daddy, so you don't have to sleep in the car anymore. So you can have your own room and go to school and be safe." Emma's eyes went huge. She looked at her father for confirmation, and when David nodded, tears streaming down his face, she launched herself at Victoria with such force that Victoria almost fell backward. Small arms wrapped around her neck, and Emma's voice whispered in her ear, "Can you be my angel forever?" Victoria held this child she'd known for less than 24 hours. This child who looked nothing like Lily and everything like her all at once, and felt something inside her chest that had been frozen solid for 7 years, finally begin to thaw. She thought about the ornament in her closet, the one she'd packed away in a box, and couldn't bear to look at a photo of Lily and Michael on their last Christmas together. She thought about the tree she'd never bought again, the presents she'd never wrapped, the carols she'd refused to hear. She thought about all the ways she'd tried to stop time on December 24th, 7 years ago, as if by refusing to celebrate she could somehow keep them alive. But time had moved forward anyway. The world had kept turning, and she had been left behind, frozen, unable to move forward and unable to go back. "Yes," she whispered into Emma's hair. "I can be your angel, if you'll let me." Emma squeezed tighter, and Victoria closed her eyes, and for the first time in 7 years, she let herself feel something other than grief. 3 months passed like a dream. David's designs transformed Victoria's company rebranding into something that went viral, that had people talking about Chen Digital not as a faceless tech corporation, but as a company with heart. His work appeared on billboards and in magazines, and Victoria watched him come back to life, watched confidence return to his shoulders and purpose return to his eyes. Emma started at a new school near the brownstone, and every Friday afternoon she would appear at Victoria's office with David, carrying her latest drawings to show Aunt Vicky. They had dinner together every Sunday. It started as a casual thing, Victoria stopping by the brownstone to drop off some furniture she wasn't using, and David insisting she stay for the spaghetti he was making. But it became routine, became ritual. Emma would set the table with elaborate care, putting Victoria's placemat next to hers. David would cook, and Victoria would help, and they would eat together like something that felt dangerously close to a family. Victoria's penthouse wasn't empty anymore. Emma's drawings covered her refrigerator. David's coffee mug had a permanent spot in her cabinet, and slowly, carefully, Victoria pulled the boxes out of her closet, the ones she'd packed away 7 years ago. She looked at photos of Lily and Michael. She cried, but the crying didn't destroy her this time. And one Sunday evening, with David's permission, she showed Emma the pictures. "This was my daughter," she said quietly, holding out a photo of Lily at age 4, gap-toothed and grinning. Her name was Lily. She would have been 12 now. Emma studied the photo with the seriousness she brought to everything important. "She's pretty. I bet she was nice." "She was," Victoria said, her throat tight. "She was very nice, and very funny, and she loved Christmas more than anything." "Does it make you sad that she's not here?" Emma asked with the blunt honesty of childhood. Victoria considered the question. "Yes," she said finally. "It makes me very sad. But you know what? I think she would have liked you very much, and I think she would want me to be happy again." Emma nodded solemnly. Then she did something that made Victoria's breath catch. She took the photo of Lily and carried it to the living room, to the small Christmas tree that Victoria had finally allowed David to convince her to buy. It was nothing like the elaborate trees of her past, just a simple 4-footer with white lights. But Emma had decorated it with construction paper ornaments and candy canes, and it was the most beautiful tree Victoria had ever seen. Emma hung the photo on one of the branches, using a ribbon as a hook. "Now she can have Christmas with us," Emma announced. "Is that okay?" Victoria couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face. David appeared beside her, his hand finding hers and squeezing tight, and she squeezed back, holding on. Christmas Eve arrived again, exactly 1 year after Victoria had found David and Emma on that dark street. They spent it together in the brownstone, the three of them decorating cookies that Emma insisted had to have a million sprinkles. After Emma went to bed, Victoria and David sat by the tree with glasses of wine, the lights casting soft shadows across the room. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly, "for giving me this, for letting me be part of your lives." David shook his head. "We should be thanking you. You gave us everything." "No," Victoria said. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning that isn't just work. You gave me," she paused, looking at the photo of Lily hanging on the tree. You gave me permission to live again. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Sarah used to say that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes shape, becomes something new. I didn't understand what she meant until I met you. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and saw in his eyes something she'd been too afraid to name. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared to care this much again, to lose this. I'm scared too, David said. But I think being scared means it matters, and I'd rather have something that matters and be scared than have nothing and be safe. Victoria reached for the ornament she'd brought with her tonight, the one she'd kept in that box for 7 years. It was a photo frame ornament, silver and slightly tarnished, with a picture of Michael and Lily from their last Christmas together. She stood and walked to the tree, and with shaking hands, she hung it next to Emma's photo of Lily. People I loved, she said softly. People who would want me to love again. David stood and came to her side, his hand settling on her shoulder with gentle understanding. I think they sent us to you, he said. I think Sarah and Lily and Michael all conspired to make sure we ended up on that street corner, at exactly the right moment for you to find us. Maybe he was right. Maybe that was what Christmas really was. Not the miracle of strangers becoming family, but the miracle of broken people finding each other and making something whole. Maybe it was about learning that love doesn't end. It just transforms, finds new shapes and new faces. Maybe it was about forgiveness, about forgiving yourself for surviving, for moving forward, for daring to be happy again. Emma's voice drifted down from upstairs, sleepy and content, calling out that she loved them both. Victoria and David called back in unison that they loved her too, and standing there in the soft glow of Christmas lights, with photos of the people they'd lost hanging beside them like blessings instead of ghosts. Victoria finally understood what it meant to be saved, not rescued from circumstances, but rescued from the prison of her own grief, rescued into a future she never expected, with people she never planned to love, creating a family from the ruins of everything they'd lost. That was the real gift, not the brownstone or the job, or even the hope. The real gift was learning that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room in your heart for both the past and the future, for both loss and love, for both endings and beginnings. And sometimes, on a cold Christmas Eve, that gift comes wrapped in the most unexpected package. A homeless man and his daughter on a dark street, waiting for an angel they didn't know they needed, an angel who needed them just as much.